So my idea with this is I know a lot of parents are going to be having their kids at the house. They have them right now. And one of the things that's very valuable for you to do as a parent is to read to them or to have them read to. So if they've not read this story, if you've read this story and you like this story, then you can share this on YouTube with them as you go. If you can join live, great. But if not, it is recorded on the YouTube channel. I'll post that link a bit later. So we're going to get started with chapter 3. This is Beamer. Beamer, say hi. That's Beamer. He's a little guy. He's not like these big hunting dogs that we're talking about, is he, Luke? So yesterday, what was chapter 2? What was chapter 2 about? What happened in chapter 2?
His grandfather gave him 6 silver traps.
Okay.
His grandfather gave him 6 silver traps. He was trying to catch a rat, but he caught his cat.
Many times.
And then he caught his mom's most prized hen. And then he heard his grandfather and someone else. He overheard them talking about like he can't sleep because of the hound, and that he's going to like a plantation, I think.
Yeah, so he's going over to the river bottoms, but yeah, he's staying up at night, and all he can hear is dogs howling. And basically, when a coon dog is on the hunt of a coon, it gives a call, and so he's hearing that baying, and he's wanting a dog in the worst way. So we're going to start chapter 3. This is the third one we've done, and so let's go ahead and get started. Chapter 3 of Where the Red Fern Grows. The dog-wanting disease never did leave me altogether. With the new work I was doing, helping Papa, it just kind of burned itself down and left a big sore in my heart. Every time I'd see a coon tracked down in our fields or along the riverbanks, the old sore would get all festered up and start hurting again. Just when I had given up all hope of ever owning a good hound, something wonderful happened. The good Lord figured I'd had heard enough, and it was time to lend a helping hand. It all started one day while I was hoeing down corn in our field close to the river. Across the river, a party of fishermen had been camped for several days. I heard the old Maxwell car as it snorted and chugged its way out of the bottoms. I knew they were leaving. Throwing down my hoe, I ran to the river and waded across at the place called Shannon Ford. I hurried to the camp store. It was always a pleasure to prowl where fishermen had camped. I usually could find things, fishing line or a forgotten fishing pole. On one occasion, I found a beautiful knife stuck in the bark of a sycamore tree forgotten by a careless fisherman. But on that day, I found the greatest of treasures, a sportsman's magazine discarded by the campers. It was a real treasure for a country boy. Because of that magazine, my entire life was changed. I sat down an old sycamore log and started thumbing through the leaves. On the back page of the magazine, I came to the for sale section. Dogs for sale, every kind of dog. I read on and on. They had dogs I had never heard of, names I couldn't make out. Far down in the right-handed corner, I found an ad that took my breath away. In small letters, it read, "Registered red bone coon hound pups, $25 each." The advertisement was from a kennel in Kentucky. I read it over and over. By the time I had memorized it, I was seeing dogs, hearing dogs, and feeling them. The magazine was forgotten. I was lost in thought. The brain of an 11-year-old boy can dream some pretty fantastic dreams. How wonderful it would be if I could have just two of those pups. Every boy in the country but me had a good hound or two, but $50? How could I ever get $50? I knew I couldn't expect help from Mama and Papa. I remembered a passage from the Bible my mother had read to us. God helps those who help themselves. I thought of the words. I mulled them over in my mind. I decided I'd ask God to help me. And there in the banks of the Illinois River in the cool shade of the tall white sycamores, I asked God to help me get 2 hound pups. It wasn't much of a prayer, but it did come right from my heart. When I left the campground of the fishermen, it was late. As I walked along, I could feel the hard bulge of the magazine jammed deep in my pocket of my overalls. The beautiful silence that follows the setting sun had settled over the river bottoms. The coolness of the rich black soil felt good to my bare feet. It was the time of day when all furried things come to life. A big swamp rabbit hopped onto the trail, sat in his haunches, and just stared at me and then scampered away. A mother gray squirrel ran out at the limb of a bur oak tree. She barked a warning to the 4 furry balls behind her. They melted from sight in the thick green. A silent gray shadow drifted down from the top of a tall sycamore. There was a squeal and a beating of wings. I heard the tinkle of a bell in the distance ahead. I knew it was Daisy, our milk cow. I'd have to start her on the way home. I took the magazine from my pocket, and again I read the ad. Slowly, a plan began to form. I'd save the money. I could sell stuff to the fishermen, crawfish, minnows, and fresh vegetables. In berry season, I could sell all the berries. I could pick up my grandfather's store. I could trap in the winter. The more I planted, the more real it became. There was the way to get those pups. I was going to save my money. I could almost feel the pups in my hand. I planned the little doghouse and where to put it. Collars I could make myself. And then the thoughts came. What could I name them? I tried name after name, voicing them out loud. None seemed to fit. Well, there'd be plenty of times for names. Right now, there was something more important. $50. A fabulous sum, a fortune, far more money than I had ever seen. Somehow, some way, I was determined to have it. I had 23 cents, a dime I had earned running errands for my grandpa, and 13 cents a fisherman had given me for a can of worms. The next morning, I went to the trash pile behind the barn. I was looking for a can, my bank. I picked up several, but they didn't seem to be what I wanted. Then I saw it, an old KC baking powder can. It was perfect, long and slender with a good tight lid. I took it down to the creek and scrubbed it with sand until it was bright and new looking. I dropped the 23 cents in the can. The coins looked so small lying there on the shiny bottom, but to me it was a good start. With my finger, I tried to measure how full it would be with $50 in it. Next, I went to the barn and up in the loft. Far back over the hay and under the eaves, I hid my can. I had a start toward making my dreams come true. 23 cents. I had a good bank, safe from the rats and from the rain and the snow. All through that summer, I worked like a beaver. In the small creek that wormed its way down through the fields, I caught crawfish with my bare hands. I trapped minnows with an old screen-wire trap I made myself, baited with yellow cornbread from my mother's kitchen. These were sold to the fishermen along with fresh vegetables and roasting ears. I tore my way through the blackberry patches until my hands and feet were scratched raw and red from the thorns. I trampled the hills seeking out the huckleberry bushes. My grandfather paid me 10 cents a bucket for my berries. Once Grandpa asked me what I did with the money I earned. I told him I was saving it to buy some hunting dogs. I asked him if he would order them for me when I had saved enough, and he said he would. I asked him not to say anything to my father. He promised me that he wouldn't. I'm sure Grandpa paid little attention to my plans. That winter, I trapped harder than ever with the 3 little traps I owned. Grandpa sold my hides to fur buyers who came to his store all through the fur season. Prices were cheap, 15 cents for a large possum hide, 25 cents for a good skunk hide. Little by little, the nickels and dimes added up. The old KC baking powder can grew heavy. I would heft its weight in the palm of my hand. With a straw, I'd measure from the lip of the can to the money, and as the months went by, the straw grew shorter and shorter. The next summer, I followed the same routine. Would you like to buy some crawfish or minnows? Maybe you'd like some fresh vegetables or roasting ears. Those fishermen were wonderful, as true sportsmen are. They seemed to sense the urgency in my voice and always bought my wares. However, many was the time I'd found my vegetables left in that abandoned camp. There never was a set price. Anything they offered was good enough for me. A year passed. I was 12. I was over the halfway mark. I had $27.46. My spirits soared, and I worked harder. Another year crawled slowly by, and then the great day came. The long, hard grind was over. I had it. I had my $50. I cried as I counted it over and over. As I set the can back in the shadowy eaves of the barn, it seemed to glow with a radiant whiteness I had never seen before. Perhaps it was all my imagination. I don't know. Lying back in the soft hay, I folded my hands behind my head, closed my eyes, and let my mind wander back over the last 2 years. I thought of those fishermen, the blackberry patches and the huckleberry hills, and I thought of that prayer I'd said when I asked God to help me get those 2 hound pups. I knew he was surely helped, for he had given me the heart, courage, and the determination. Early in the next morning, with the can jammed deep in the pocket of my overalls, I flew to the store. As I trotted along, I whistled and sang. I felt as big as the tallest mountain in the Ozarks. Arriving at my destination, I saw 2 wagons were tied up at the hitching rack. I knew some farmers had come to the store, so I waited until they left. As I walked in, I saw my grandfather behind the counter, tugging and pulling. I worked the can out of my pocket and dumped it out in front of him and looked up. Grandpa was dumbfounded. He tried to say something, but it wouldn't come out. He looked at me and he looked at the pile of coins. Finally, in a voice much louder than he ordinarily used, he asked, "Where'd you get all this?" "I told you, Grandpa," I said. "I was saving my money so I could buy 2 hound pups, and I did. You said you'd order them for me. I've got the money now, and I want you to order them." Grandpa stared at me over his glasses and then back at the money. "How long have you been saving this?" he asked. "A long time, Grandpa," I said. "How long?" he asked. I told him I'd been saving for 2 years. His mouth flew open, and in a loud voice he said, "2 years?" I nodded my head. The way my grandfather stared at me made me uneasy. I was on needles and pins. Taking his eyes from me, he glanced back at the money. He saw the faded piece of paper sticking out from the coins, and he worked it out, asking as he did, "What's this?" I told him it was the ad, telling where to order my dogs. He read it, turned it over, and glanced at the other side. I saw the astonishment leave his eyes, and the friendly old grandfather look came back. I felt much better. Dropping the paper back on the money, he turned, picked up an old turkey feather duster, and started dusting where there was no dust. He kept glancing at me out of the corner of his eye as he walked slowly down to the other end of the store, dusting here and there. He put the duster down, came from behind the counter, and walked up to me. Laying a friendly old work-calloused hand on my head, he changed the conversation altogether, saying, "Son, you need a haircut." I told him I didn't mind. I didn't like my hair short. Flies and mosquitoes bothered me. He glanced down at my bare feet and asked, "How come your feet are cut and scratched like that?" I told him it was pretty tough picking blackberries barefoot. He nodded his head. It was too much for my grandfather. He turned and walked away, and I saw the glasses come off and the old red handkerchief come out. I heard the good excuse of blowing his nose. He stood there for several seconds with his back toward me, and when he turned around, I noticed that his eyes were moist. In a quavering voice, he said, "Well, son, it's your money. You worked for it, and you worked hard. You got it honestly, and you want some dogs. We're going to get you those dogs. Be darned. Be darned." That was as near as I ever came to hearing my grandfather curse, if you can call it cursing. He walked over and picked up the ad again, asking, "Is this thing 2 years old?" I nodded. "Well," he said, "the first thing we have to do is write the outfit. There may not even be a place like this in Kentucky anymore. After all, a lot of things can happen in 2 years. Seeing that I was worried, he said, "Now you go home, I'll write to the kennels, and I'll let you know when I get an answer. If we can't get the dogs there, we can get them someplace else. And I don't think, if I were you, I'd let my pa know anything about this right now. I happen to know he wants to buy that red mule from old man Potter." I told him I wouldn't, and turned to leave the store. As I reached the door, my grandfather said in a loud voice, "Say, it's been a long time since you had any candy, hasn't it?" I nodded my head. I noticed it wasn't one of those nickel sacks of candy. It was one of the quarter kind. My eyes never left my grandfather's hand. Time after time, it dipped in and out of the candy counter. Peppermint sticks, jawbreakers, whorehounds, and gumdrops. That sack bulged, and so did my eyes. Handing the sack to me, he said, "Here, first big coon you catch with those dogs, you can pay me back." I told him I would. On my way home with a jawbreaker on one side of my mouth and a piece of whorehound in the other, I skipped and hopped, making half an effort to try to whistle and sing, and couldn't for the candy. I had the finest grandpa in all the world, and I was the happiest boy in the world. I wanted to share my happiness with my sisters, but decided not to say anything about ordering the pups. Arriving home, I dumped that sack of candy out in the bed, and 6 little hands helped themselves to it. I was well repaid by the love and adoration I saw in the wide blue eyes of my 3 little sisters. "Luke, how long did that boy work for that
2
money?
years,
And how much did he raise?
$50.
Is $50 a lot of money?
Well, back then they were poor.
Back then it was poor.
And last chapter it said he was 11, and 2 years said now he's 13.
Now he's
so
13.
now he's our age.
Yep, he's your age now. So the power of this book is just seeing that resilience. He prayed to God that he would be able to earn that money, and God just didn't drop $50 out of the sky, did he?
No.
What did he have to do for it?
He had to work.
He had to work. You ever work hard for money?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I don't.
Ah,
I
very
do chores
good.
for free.
Ah, he does chores for free.
Hint, hint.
I pay rent for free as well. So, anyhow, thank you so much for joining us for chapter 3.